What if everything you've ever been told about being too much is actually proof that there's something extraordinary about you? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see why Carl Jung believed that the very traits society criticizes might be the keys to your deepest purpose. Carl Jung famously said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what happens if the real you doesn't fit in? What if your intensity, your sensitivity, your refusal to settle for shallow answers, what if none of those are flaws to be fixed, but rather signs of a rare and powerful psychological type? If you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own life, if people have ever told you you're too deep or too complicated, it's not just a coincidence. According to Jung's groundbreaking research into personality types, some people possess what he called differentiated consciousness, a way of experiencing reality that's genuinely uncommon. Here's where it gets fascinating. Jung discovered that these rare personalities often spend their whole lives thinking there's something wrong with them, when in reality, they're operating at a level of psychological sophistication that most people never even approach. But there's a catch, and I'll get to what that is in just a moment. Today, we're breaking down 8 clear signs that you might have this rare personality type. If you recognize yourself in these traits, it won't just change how you view your past, it might totally shift how you see your future. But first, let me ask you, have you ever noticed that your emotional reactions seem way more intense than what other people experience? There's a psychological reason for this that Jung uncovered, and it's probably not what you think. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that others can't comprehend. Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. Some people don't just feel emotions, they experience what he called affect-tone complexes, which create deep psychological resonance. In plain English, you don't just have feelings, feelings move through you like powerful ocean currents, deep and transformative. This is what most people miss. It's not that you're emotionally unstable, it's that you're emotionally sophisticated. But why does the world try to convince you otherwise? When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting, you're accessing layers of psychological experience that most people have learned to suppress. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So your emotional intensity isn't a burden, it's like psychological radar, picking up things others can't see. You sense the tension in a room before anyone says a word. You notice when someone's smile doesn't match their eyes. You pick up on the emotional undercurrents of every interaction, because your psyche is wired for depth, not for small talk. But here's where things get tricky, and where people with this trait often trip themselves up. The world tells you to tone it down, to be more reasonable, to stop being so dramatic. But Jung understood that when you suppress this emotional depth, you don't become normal, you become neurotic. You start experiencing what he called psychological splitting, where one part of you knows the truth while another part tries to conform. That's probably why you feel so drained trying to be someone you're not. But what if I told you Jung discovered a way to turn this emotional intensity from a burden into your greatest strength? Hang on, because I'll be sharing that technique in sign number 6. Sign 2. You question everything with unrelenting curiosity. According to Jung, most people live what he called unconscious lives. They accept whatever society tells them, without ever examining it. But you can't help but dig deeper. Jung would have seen you as someone with an active thinking function that refuses to accept surface explanations. Here's the key. People who question everything aren't being difficult, they're being psychologically honest. But there's a hidden cost to this honesty, one that most people only realize when it's too late. You don't just ask what, you ask why. Why do people stay in jobs or relationships that make them miserable? Why do we accept systems that don't serve us? Why do we pretend that shallow conversations are real connection? Your mind is always looking for the truth beneath the surface. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to see beyond current limitations. While most people are content with the status quo, you're already imagining what could be different, what could be better, what could be more real. But here's the paradox Jung noticed. The more clearly you see things, the more isolated you can feel. Why? Because your questions threaten other people's sense of security. When you ask hard questions, you're not just looking for answers, you're challenging the psychological defenses that keep others comfortable in their limitations. That's why you might have been called cynical or negative when in reality, you're just being courageously honest. Jung found something fascinating about people like you. You have what he called prophetic consciousness. You see where things are heading before most people do. This gift comes with a responsibility I'll talk about in the final sign, and trust me, it might surprise you. Sign 3. You've developed fierce independence as a survival skill. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And you've learned to do exactly that, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. According to Jung, people with rare personalities often develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than others, usually because life forced them to. Here's what most people and even many therapists miss. Your independence isn't a defense mechanism. It's an achievement. But society will try to convince you it's a problem, and that's dangerous. You've learned, sometimes the hard way, that depending on others for your sense of worth is like standing in quicksand. So, you built yourself. You stood up, often alone, and created an identity that nobody could take away from you, not with a harsh word, and not by walking away. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never finish this journey, because it means confronting what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide. But here's where things get complicated. Your independence attracts people who want to possess it, and repels people who feel threatened by it. Jung identified a particular pattern in how independent personalities handle relationships, and understanding this pattern changes everything. You don't need someone to complete you, because you've done the work to become whole. That means you don't look for relationships out of desperation, but out of real choice. You don't want someone to save you, you want someone who will stand beside you. As you both keep growing, Jung discovered something profound about truly independent people. They become magnets for both authentic love and manipulative control. The key is knowing the difference, and I'll show you Jung's method for spotting it in sign number 7. Your solitude isn't loneliness, it's a sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles and expectations. That self-knowledge, Jung said, is the foundation of all psychological health. Sign 4. You possess intuitive awareness that borders on psychic. Jung revolutionized psychology when he identified intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He said, intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious. What Jung discovered, and what modern science is only now catching up to, is that some people's nervous systems are wired to pick up information that others miss completely. But this gift can become a burden, especially in relationships, if you don't know how to manage it. You don't just observe people, you read their psychological state. You notice micro-expressions, subtle energy shifts, and all the words left unspoken. Jung would have seen this as evidence of what he called active imagination, the ability to perceive beyond the obvious. When someone says they're fine, but their body language screams distress, you can't ignore it. When there's tension in the room that everyone else pretends isn't there, you feel it in your bones. This isn't paranoia, it's a high level of psychological sensitivity. But here's Jung's warning. If you don't learn how to protect that sensitivity, it will drain you. He identified a specific technique that allows intuitive people to maintain their awareness without soaking up everyone else's psychological chaos. According to Jung, people with strong intuition often become unconscious therapists. You end up doing emotional labor for everyone around you. You regulate conversations, diffuse tension, and carry unspoken pain, simply because you can't not notice it. Jung made a startling discovery about intuitive personalities. They often lose themselves in the process of understanding others. There's a psychological trap here that ensnares almost everyone with this trait, and recognizing it is crucial for your well-being. The danger is that you get so good at reading others that you forget to check in with yourself. You become externally focused, always scanning for emotional data, while your own needs go ignored or unspoken. But when Jung worked with highly intuitive individuals, he found they could turn this sensitivity from a burden into a superpower. The secret lies in setting what he called psychological boundaries, and I'll share that technique in just a bit. Carl Jung observed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if being true to yourself means rejecting everything society insists you should want? Jung discovered that some personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. Here's what he realized about people like you. You don't choose meaning over popularity. Your psyche demands it. But this creates a very specific kind of inner conflict that can be devastating if you don't know what's happening beneath the surface. You've probably tried chasing external validation at some point. Maybe you played along, said all the right things, followed the script, and fit in where you were supposed to. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms right away. That gnawing emptiness, that feeling that you're betraying something essential, that quiet desperation even when you're being celebrated on the outside. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you actually develop what he called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche rebels against inauthenticity. Jung observed that most people never experience real meaning because they're too afraid of being rejected. But people like you face a different challenge, one that's both more difficult and more rewarding. You simply cannot pretend that shallow goals matter. You can't get excited about achievements that lack depth. You can't maintain relationships built on convenience rather than real connection. Your psychological wiring just won't let you. That's why you've probably felt like a stranger in your own culture at times. But Jung identified something remarkable about people who are driven by meaning. They become evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to settle for less than authentic connection, you challenge others to confront their own inauthenticity. When you ask questions everyone else is avoiding, you create a space where truth can finally show up. When you live according to your values, not your fears, you give others permission to do the same. But here's the most important insight Jung had about meaning-driven personalities. You have a psychological responsibility that goes beyond your own happiness. I'll reveal what that is in the final sign, and it might change how you see your entire life's purpose. Sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments that once fit. Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But what happens when you refuse to live out someone else's unlived dreams? What happens when you grow beyond the psychological limits of your environment? Jung discovered something profound about real psychological growth. It's often a solitary journey, and it comes with a unique kind of grief. Understanding this grief is crucial for your continued evolution. You've likely experienced the pain of realizing that people who used to know you don't anymore. Not because you're difficult or arrogant, but because you've shed layers of conditioning that no longer fit. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. Here's what most people misunderstand about outgrowing relationships. It's not a choice. It's the natural result of becoming more authentic. But Jung identified a way to move through this transition that honors both your growth and your connections to the past. Those friends who knew you when you were shrinking, people-pleasing, or hiding your truth, they remember that version of you. Sometimes they want that version back. It was safer, more predictable, easier for them. But you can't go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've tasted authentic living, there's no pretending you don't know what you know. Jung made a startling observation about people who outgrow their environments. They often experience what he called the dark night of the soul, a period of profound loneliness that tests your commitment to authenticity. This isn't just ordinary loneliness, it's existential. It's the awareness that your path is unique, your perspective is rare, and your growth might mean leaving behind everything familiar. But Jung also discovered something beautiful. People who make it through this transition attract relationships of extraordinary depth and authenticity. The key is understanding his concept of psychological resonance, how authentic people find each other. When you stop performing and start being, when you stop shrinking and start expanding, when you stop apologizing for your depth and start owning it, your entire relational field shifts. Sign 7. You offer profound presence in a distracted world. According to Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you're the kind of person who creates transformation simply by showing up as your real self? Jung identified a rare quality. Some people have the ability to create what he called psychological holding space. If you have this gift, you already know how much it can cost you. But you might not realize how rare and valuable it really is. When someone talks to you, they feel truly seen. You don't just listen to the words they feel, you're listening to what's underneath the words. You don't offer quick fixes. You offer deep witnessing. You don't rush to judge, you make space for truth to surface. Jung understood that this kind of presence is actually a form of psychological healing. In your company, People remember what it feels like to be fully human, complex, contradictory, worthy of understanding. But here's Jung's crucial insight. People with this gift often exhaust themselves by giving it away too freely. He identified specific psychological boundaries that allow empathetic people to keep their depth without burning out. You've probably found yourself in the role of unofficial therapist, emotional anchor, or safe harbor for others. That makes you invaluable, but it can also make you invisible. You get so good at holding space for others that you forget to ask for space for yourself. Jung discovered something important about highly empathetic personalities. They often develop what he called helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice that ultimately serves no one. The work isn't about shutting down or closing your heart. It's about learning discernment, knowing who deserves access to your emotional presence and who has earned the right to give back. When Jung worked with people who had this natural therapeutic presence, he found they needed to develop a specific skill that transformed their relationships entirely. I'll share that skill in the final sign, because it's the key to keeping your gifts without losing yourself. Sign 8. You sense a larger purpose that you can't yet define. Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. If you've felt a persistent sense that you're meant for more than the ordinary, Jung would call this the transcendent function, your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. Jung found that people with this undefined but urgent sense of purpose aren't delusional or grandiose. They're responding to what he called an archetypal calling. But there's a way this calling can get distorted, and understanding it is crucial. You know that restless feeling that you have something to contribute, something to build, something to say. Maybe it's not totally clear yet, but it's undeniably there. Jung saw this as the sign of creative potential demanding expression. It's not about fame or recognition, it's about alignment, about being in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung noticed that people who ignore this calling often develop what he called neurotic symptoms: anxiety, depression, a sense of meaninglessness. Here's the most profound insight. Your calling isn't just personal, it's transpersonal. You're not here just to fulfill yourself. You're here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms. Through your depth, your questions, and your refusal to settle, you help humanity evolve. That's why you can't stand ordinary. That's why surface-level connections feel empty. That's why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Your psyche knows you have work to do, and that work requires authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also warned about the ego inflation that can come from recognizing your purpose. The key is holding both humility and power, knowing you're special without thinking you're superior. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying personalities just like yours. He called people with these traits differentiated individuals, those who have developed a level of psychological complexity that enables them to see, feel, and understand at depths most people never touch. So, if even half of these signs resonate with you, you are not just different. You're part of what Jung described as the leading edge of human consciousness. You're among the people who help push our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, you'll be misunderstood. And yes, it takes more courage than most people will ever know. But Jung truly believed that people like you are essential for the psychological evolution of humanity. Let's dig deeper into what these signs mean for your life and what you can do to fully embrace your rare personality type, turning emotional intensity into a strength. Earlier, I promised I'd share Jung's technique for transforming emotional intensity from a burden into a strength. Here it is. Jung taught that the key is integration, not fighting your emotions, not trying to fix them, but learning to listen to them as messengers. When you feel a powerful emotion, ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to show me about myself or the world? Instead of being swept away by your feelings, you become curious about them, allowing them to reveal deeper truths. This process is what Jung called shadow work, facing, understanding, and integrating the parts of yourself that society says are too much. It's not about becoming less emotional, but about becoming more conscious of what your emotions are trying to communicate. When you do this, your emotional depth becomes a source of wisdom and transformation, not just for you, but for everyone around you. Psychological boundaries for the intuitive and empathetic. Now, let's talk about that intuitive sensitivity, the gift that lets you read between the lines, but can also leave you feeling overwhelmed by other people's energy. Jung's solution? Boundaries. Not the kind that walls you off from others, but the kind that honors your need for self-care. Jung taught that intuitive people need regular periods of solitude and self-reflection. This isn't selfishness, it's maintenance for your nervous system. Practice asking yourself, is this feeling mine, or am I picking it up from someone else? If it's not yours, consciously let it go. Make space in your life for activities that return you to yourself, journaling, walking in nature. Creative expression, these aren't luxuries. They're essential to keeping your gift healthy and sustainable. Navigating relationships as an independent individual. If you're someone who's fiercely independent, you've probably noticed that you attract all kinds of people, some who are drawn to your strength, and others who want to control or diminish it. Jung's advice here was simple but powerful discernment. Learn to recognize who is attracted to your wholeness because they're inspired, and who is drawn because they want to take from you what they lack themselves. Jung suggested watching for patterns. Do people respect your boundaries, or do they try to override them? Do they encourage your growth, or do they want you to shrink for their comfort? The more you honor your own journey, the more you'll attract those capable of true partnership, those willing to walk beside you, not ahead or behind. Embracing the grief of outgrowing your old life. One of the hardest parts of developing this rare personality type is outgrowing people, places, and versions of yourself that once felt like home. Jung wrote about the importance of honoring this grief, not rushing through it, not minimizing it, but letting yourself feel the sadness and the nostalgia. He called this process the dark night of the soul, and he saw it as a necessary passage for anyone seeking real authenticity. The loneliness you feel when you leave old patterns and relationships behind isn't a sign that you're lost, it's a sign that you're evolving. Give yourself permission to mourn what you're leaving, but also trust that what's ahead is more aligned with your true self. The skill that protects your empathy. Remember how I mentioned that skill Jung taught to people? With a natural therapeutic presence? Here's what it is: reciprocity. It's not enough to be there for others. You have to learn to ask for and accept support, too. Empathy shouldn't be a one-way street. Jung encouraged his clients to notice where the energy flows in their relationships. Are you always the giver? Are you allowed to receive as well? Practice expressing your own needs with the same compassion you offer others. This isn't selfishness, it's balance. When you surround yourself with people who can hold space for you in return, your empathy becomes a sustainable resource, not a drain. Living with a sense of purpose. If you carry that feeling that you're meant for something bigger, Jung would say you're experiencing an archetypal calling, but he warned about getting caught up in grandiosity or feeling like you have to save the world. Instead, work to align your daily actions with your deepest values. Purpose isn't always about a big, dramatic mission. Sometimes it's about showing up authentically in your relationships, your work, and your creative life. Jung's advice: stay humble. Trust that your influence comes not just from what you do, but from who you are. The more you accept and express your unique nature, the more you naturally inspire those around you to do the same. The responsibility of being different. Jung's most profound insight for people like you is this: with rare psychological gifts comes a responsibility, not to fix everyone, not to carry the world on your shoulders, but to model authenticity, depth, and courage. Jung saw individuals like you as bridges, connecting the unconscious and conscious, the personal and the collective. By living your truth, you help others see what's possible. But don't fall into the trap of thinking you're better than anyone else. Jung called this ego inflation. The real power is in holding both your uniqueness and your humility. Recognize that you're special, but so is everyone else in their own way. Wrapping up the signs. If you've seen yourself in these 8 signs: emotional depth, relentless curiosity, independence, intuition, craving meaning, outgrowing your old life, profound presence, and a sense of larger purpose, you are not just too much, you are exactly what the world needs right now. Your sensitivity is a superpower. Your intensity is not excessive, it's necessary. Your refusal to settle isn't troublemaking, it's bravery in action. Remember Jung's words: the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is the journey you're on, and by walking it, you give others permission to do the same. So what does all this mean for you moving forward? If you recognize yourself in these signs, you're part of a rare group that Jung believed was absolutely essential for humanity's growth. The world actually needs people like you, people who feel deeply, question relentlessly, refuse to accept shallow answers, and are brave enough to walk their own path. But here's the honest truth. It's not always easy. You're going to have days when you feel misunderstood, when your depth feels like a burden instead of a gift, when your independence or sensitivity isolates you. That's all part of the journey. Jung never sugarcoated it. He knew that psychological growth is often a lonely road, but he also insisted it's the only one worth traveling if you want to live fully alive. Here's what you can take away from all of this. 1. You're not broken, you're wired differently. What people call too much is actually just different, and often advanced. Jung's research shows that these rare traits are evidence of psychological evolution, not flaws. 2. Your struggles have meaning. The loneliness, the sense of not fitting in, the longing for meaning, these aren't random. 3. They're the natural side effects of deep growth and a refusal to live on autopilot. For if you feel these things, you're not failing, you're evolving. 5. You have a responsibility, not to carry everyone else's pain, but to model what it looks like to live with courage and depth. 6. When you show up as your real self, you become a living example to others that it's possible to live authentically. 7. Your gifts need protection, whether it's your empathy, your intuition, or your independent spirit. Protect these things the way you would a rare treasure. 8. Set boundaries. Seek out relationships that feed your soul, and give yourself permission to grow, even if it means outgrowing what's familiar. 9. Connection is possible, but only when you're real. The more honest and authentic you are, the more you'll attract people who resonate with your real self. 10. Yes, this may mean having fewer relationships, but the ones you do have will be deeper and more meaningful. 11. Purpose unfolds over time. Don't get caught up in thinking you need to have your entire life mapped out. 12. Jung believed that purpose is revealed through living authentically, not by chasing some grand external goal. 13. Trust your curiosity, your questions, and your inner sense of direction. How can you apply this? Start by honoring your emotional life when you feel deeply. Remember, it's not a flaw, it's evidence of your depth. If you catch yourself questioning everything, know that this curiosity is your gift, not your curse. When you feel the urge to withdraw and be alone, let yourself. Solitude is your sanctuary, not a sign of isolation, but a space for integration and insight. If you sense a calling or purpose you can't quite name, trust it. Let it guide your choices, even if the path doesn't make sense to others. Most importantly, seek out others who value authenticity over appearance, depth over drama, and meaning over mindless conformity. These are your people. Jung's final challenge. Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." If you're watching this, you're already awakening. You're already doing the radical work of looking inward, of confronting your shadow, of refusing to live a life that isn't truly yours. And that's how change happens, not just for you, but for everyone around you. When one person wakes up to their true self, it sends ripples through their relationships, their communities, and even the culture at large. Jung believed that the evolution of consciousness starts with individuals who are brave enough to stop apologizing for being different. So, if you felt seen by any part of this video, know this: you are not too much. The world is often too little, but your depth, your questions, your vision, they are exactly what's needed to make the world more. Your invitation. If these signs resonated with you, let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below, tell me which sign felt most true for you, or share your own story of feeling too much. I want this to be a space where rare personalities can find each other and recognize their own value. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's been made to feel like they don't fit, please share this video with them. We need more people who are willing to live with depth and courage. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to continue exploring these kinds of topics together. We're just getting started on this journey into the depths of what makes you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. You're exactly enough. The world is waiting for you to show up, just as you are. And as Jung knew, people like you are the ones who change everything. Thank you for watching. And until next time, keep being bravely, unapologetically you.